This is a rereading of the first part of Chapter 4, Jacob's Ladder, this time without the odd humming that appeared in the first video. Again, this chapter is long and detailed and why it is being read to you in many parts. Chapter 4, Rising Alone. The great path has no gates. Thousands of roads enter it. When you pass through the gateless gate, you walk the universe alone. Muman. I have decided to sit alone while I write this chapter. No Anders, no anyone. Just me and an empty room. The jury is out as to how empty I might be, however. Symbolically, alone was the best way to do this. The material this chapter is based upon hits me very hard. Almost every time I began to write, a giant headache would form. It almost paralyzed any attempt to generate anything readable. The pain felt like a nail being driven into the center of my forehead. This might actually be backwards. Perhaps a nail was being pulled out. Going in or coming out can hurt just as bad. Time will tell which side of the hammer I was using. Rather than just take an aspirin or chew some willow bark, the stuff aspirin comes from, I will go on with this presentation alone. Awakening is a very misunderstood. I was going to write achievement, but it's not an achievement. Just a happening. It's like making a long, steep, tough climb up a mountain, only to get to the top and go, nice view. Then you walk back down. That's it. Nothing special. But it revolutionizes everything. At least that is how it looks when it first happens. However, one discovers that there is a whole new process which is about to start. Awakening is the shocking realization that there is only one. Not one thing, or all is connected, just one. It sounds like a simple reordering of words, but the deeper meaning of that word order is profound. Everyone has the constricting belief that awakening, or God, is over there somewhere, and their job in life, they feel, is to find it. The problem is that we are here, and we will always be here. But if awakening is over there, how can it be found? Actually, it is always here, but what it is not what 99% of seekers really want. Seekers want the enlightenment they have been sold, being happy, important, full of love, having no more problems. Enlightenment as a continuous orgasmic drug high. That is the reason they are seeking in the first place, the wished-for blissful finish line. If anyone really understood what awakening was, no one would want it. That is because there's nothing for me in awakening. A true encounter with the Absolute, God, reveals that no one is doing the experiencing. Only the Absolute revealing itself to the Absolute. Nothing exists, yet there is the appearance of existence. Realization is alone, all one. But everyone fears alone, so as a result, they run to spiritual practices, patterns, lovers, food, booze. In other words, any distraction to avoid the only true fear, the fear of no self, often called emptiness. And this is not the fear of death. Rather, it is the fear that you, as a human being, do not exist at all. That is where all the spiritual groups get caught. They look for what's in it for me, or us. Awakening is one and alone, for there is no second. The initial glimpse of this is so terrifying to ego that it responds with corresponding emotions of meaninglessness and despair. This is done to try to get us to turn back to the dream. But when the mind falls away, those emotions go also. And all that is left is the marvelous curiosity about the dream and the genuine interest focused upon what is going to happen next. Each person blossoms from a different catalyst. The only thing that enlightened people have in common is what they find. So it is better to encourage the inward search, without demanding the student find an exact formula or discipline. Richard Rose. When talking about the exit door to Plato's cave, No matter how many groups of people band together spiritually, the door must be walked through alone. For a while we can walk with others and share the journey. But there comes a point when continuing onward means having to follow the metaphor of squeezing through the eye of a needle. Nothing can go with us, not even ourselves. That stops many seekers right in their tracks, as everyone has something special in the dream, which they do not want to give up. There are a few odd things about the exit door from the cave that should be mentioned. The first is the well-known Zen reference to a gateless gate. The door seems to be locked or barred until we pass through it. Then we see it was never locked at all. Similar in theory to the chains latching the prisoners in their seats, i.e. the locks that bind are not actually locked. The second part of the exit door metaphor is that generally, it seems few go all the way through the first time they come to it. Most stop part way. Some get a glimpse of the hallway beyond the door. Some turn around and view the entire theater cave. Others just turn and rush back without seeing much at all. Yet if they manage to return to that doorway a second time, they tend to linger far longer. If the cave can be classified as the greater mind, then the doorway itself is the viewpoint where one can turn back and see the mind and the dream in its complete entirety. Taking this to the next step, the hallway beyond the door would then be the funnel or vortex leading to the totality of the self. Pyramid 1. Umpire, Horus, Negretto. Richard Rose symbolized the entire spiritual process as a ladder, which he diagrammed more as 3 triangle pyramids, one on top of the other. Each pyramid represented a complete stage of the work. Jacob's Ladder is the map utilized in his book Psychology of the Observer, the text where Rose outlined his spiritual system. It is named Jacob's Ladder in reference to the story in the Old Testament. That tale tells of Jacob, who, as he slept while on the way to Haran, climbed a ladder to have a vision of heaven. On returning to reality, Jacob commented, "How dreadful is this place?" After years of studying this material, one day a connection was made. It was an inspiration about the number 3. In sacred geometry, 3 is the digit that acts like a door, where the non-moving 2 can become the many, 4 or greater. The main ancient Egyptian pyramids at Giza and secondary pyramids are found in sets of 3, which personify in stone the religious trinity of Osiris, Isis, and Horus. Handed down through Persia, Mithras, and Greece, Bacchus, this eventually was translated into the Christian trinity of Jesus, Father, and the Holy Spirit. The 3 stages of alchemy are symbolized as well through a 3 or 4-step process of Negretto, black, Albedo, white, and Rubedo, red. Upon completion, this process led to the Philosopher's Stone, total knowledge. It was hard for a while for me to see these specific connections with alchemy, aside from the basic principle of the 3 main stages. The ties, however, were strengthened when I came across the alchemic manuscript, the Mutus Liber, the Silent Book. First published in 1677 in New Rochelle, France, this work contains almost no words at all. Instead, one finds 15 images. The first plate of the Silent Book shows a sleeping man with a ladder beside him, while the last plate depicts the man risen and the ladder cast aside. I believe this book to be the symbolic rendering of climbing Jacob's ladder. The Mutus Liber plates and my interpretation are presented in detail in the appendix. Finally, when listening to Adyashanti present his views that there are 3 main qualities of awakening, it was like a tumbler on a lock fell in place. Each trinity is a similar pointer to the process of going from seated in the cave to walking through the exit tunnel out of it. Could Rose, the medieval alchemists, ancient Egyptian priests, and Adyashanti all be explaining the same thing? And more importantly, what help would any of it possibly be for someone on the path to knowing? Rose's map of Jacob's Ladder, while simple and functional, can be confusing. There are a couple of things that I really like about the metaphor. As mentioned, his ladder is symbolized as 3 pyramids, each on top of the other. The lowest is the physical realm, the body or the thought. The middle pyramid represents the mental area of higher mind, and the top pyramid is the essence or the self. Yet each of his three pyramids are purposely not meant to be equal. In fact, they get smaller as they rise. Mirroring similar principles from Gurdjieff, Rose felt that everything in our reality was pyramidal in form. There are more people on the lower stages of any area than on the higher ones. Similarly, there are far more amateur golf players than professional players, more students to professors, and so on. It is much the same in spirituality. I think that this is an important point to bring out. If someone goes from seated in the cave theater to walking around, but they by default join a smaller area of the upper part of the pyramid. That is a key reason for the gravitation of seekers towards spiritual groups. Less people makes it seem like something different, but it is still the same pyramid, just compressed to appear different. Rose's pyramids are each, of course, triangular. Each is made of a baseline of 2 points, such as A and B. These are opposing forces that create the dual reality. For example, in the lowest pyramid, the two ends can be labeled pain and pleasure, good and bad, high and low. We spend our lives trying to move away from the negative pole of experience, pain, and towards pleasure. However, it continually seems as if life is pushing back. As a result, a tension exists. There is a great chance that we may never even realize that we swing back and forth like the pendulum of a grandfather clock. As soon as we fall away from the center point, the string we are attached to yanks us, but always too hard, thus thrusting us to the other side of center. The process repeats endlessly. This is where the idea of betweenness comes in, being in the magnetic center point, which has all the power. Power can then propel us up the pyramid. Advancing is accomplished by implementing inner processes on ourselves, ones that move us eventually up to reach the third point of the pyramid, the top. In each pyramid, essentially it is this middle base point which rises upward to become the new, higher pyramid point, C. This may not be the best explanation for the use of betweenness in ladder work. It's not that we go up, but pull the center point between A and B up. I saw this in a documentary once on pyramid building. The base must be stable, and the center point gets raised up as it grows to not allow twist to the shape. This point, C, becomes the high point which Rose labeled in the first pyramid the umpire. At the same time, we also perform what Rose called ladder work. This is to help someone below you move up a step, while simultaneously gaining help from someone one step above you to aid your own upward progress. Thus, in a sense, all participants will move up the ladder together. Reaching this unifying higher point will reconcile the two opposites below into a clearer point of reference, one where both sides of the line are seen as equal. This is not about bringing the opposites together or balancing the extremes. Rather, it can be likened to the sky that incorporates the alternation of day and night, the Tao that incorporates yin and yang. It sees that a zebra is neither white with black stripes nor black with white stripes. It is transparent with black and white stripes. John Kent. We don't fix the duality. We see it clearly from a much higher place, a vantage point where both are false but necessary. In simple terms, to reach the umpire and to integrate what it shows leads to optimal human functioning, thereby facilitating living as a human being as we were intended to. This higher point, such as point C, is then found to be the base of the next pyramid, CD, where an entire new process begins, and the new goal being to reach the top of that new pyramid. The second pyramid is topped by point E, which Rose called the process observer, the greater mind. The highest point of the third pyramid is G, the absolute. Each point is higher, a more unified observation post for what is below. In other words, the umpire watches the body's experience, though the process observer watches the body and the umpire, and the absolute watches all awareness. While there are only 3 pyramids, Rose did not mean to imply that there are only 3 steps. Rather, that each pyramid is a complete stage, yet one that is filled with multiple smaller steps along the way. Rose also commented about something called the invisible current, the finger of God stretching back to us. We can use this current via betweenness to touch the finger, as presented in the Sistine Chapel ceiling. Rose suggested that spiritual work is not just about doing personal work, where we more clearly see all the areas of adversity and expose oncoming traps, so that we can thereby step over the holes. Rather, it also involves being directly aware of this higher force that is looking to help us. The point may be, no pun intended, that the finger or ladder of God may not be easily seen. In fact, it might even be thought of as something we would want to turn away from initially. The finger for the adults in the movie Pleasantville was the arrival of David and Jennifer. The adults saw them as troublemakers, creating rebellion in their young people. Thus they were taken as something to confront, rather than messengers from a realm beyond the bubble. The message being presented within the story was to take a step out of their closed black and white static reality and into a world of color possibilities. We must hone our own intuition to catch a similar message arriving for us. With the latter metaphor, most get the idea that spiritual work is climbing upwards like a religious movement to heaven in the sky. Given that all of this is a paradox, we may find truth through falling rather than from climbing. Falling into truth means that rising up the ladder generally comes from some form of dropping, of attachments, egos, addictions, and beliefs, trauma, which makes us fall over ourselves, or surrender, where we drop to the ground, as Arjuna did, from realizing our inability to make the dream behave as we want it to. Yet each time something falls off of us, we get lighter, hence the inevitable rise. Herein lies a reminder from one of Rose's key pointers, that the path to truth is really a path of backing away from that which is untrue. Most of what is untrue consists of the very things we hold on to the tightest. As a result, there is a feeling of falling as we let go of our hard grasping to all of these makeups of self. This, therefore, is not guiding us to look outside of ourselves. Rather, it is a call to go directly inward. Most spiritual work is built upon the assumption that if we do exercises from the highest point of the ladder, we will reach the top faster. And that is not necessarily true. This is because the work in the lower, i.e. the more physical areas, will by default have been ignored. It is more important to see exactly where we are right now and work specifically with that area. To not do so would be akin to blasting off for Pluto without first taking the time to build a spaceship. The entire realm of thought and inquiry was one of the main areas that first drew me to Richard Rose. These precepts encourage a very practical, grounded, and self-directed focus toward self-knowledge. The challenge for us is not to get drawn deeply into anyone's metaphor of the spiritual search. Instead, we want to examine the pointers from various people, individuals we think offer us honest insights about the path. From there, we sort through it all to take into our worldview the pieces and ideas that are most helpful to our search. We use these pointers specifically to go further. In other words, looking where the finger is pointing and not falling in the temptation to get stuck looking at or even studying the finger. While this chapter is more or less an overview covering some of the main pointers that I came across, which match my experience in these areas, I leave it to you to take on for yourself anything that might be helpful before going off and finding how to best apply those items to your search. Our walking must be individual, the path we actually require, as opposed to the one we wish to have, which, more than likely, will just be another way of finding a group and staying cozy somewhere in the cave. The latter is about locating sanity. It is definitely not about increasing personal insanity. As such, that journey is both personal and unique. Thank you for listening to the rereading of the first part of Chapter 4. The second part will be coming shortly.